Welcome to my channel. Hi everyone, how are you doing? Welcome back to my channel and to another episode of Missing Kids. I don't really have anything going on in my agenda today except for maybe looking for an aloe vera plant. I don't know. But I'm, just taking it easy, and I don't feel much like doing anything extra strenuous. So I'm just going to tell you a story about a case that occurred quite a while ago. So today we are going even further back into history during wartime in 1944 to one of the oldest cases that I have ever discussed. And this will be a story about a small boy who allegedly vanished into thin air, just like that. And it happened while he was playing just outside his home. July 18, 1944 was an evening like any other on Beda Street, a long residential street sprinkled with homes, a Tuesday evening. But there was something different about that evening in July, which would change the course of the Marlowe family's life forever. So there you have it. The story started over 80 years ago. And back then, Richard Marlowe was a happy, blue-eyed little boy with a pronounced cowlick on his blonde crown. And he lived with his mother Gertrude and his sister Eileen, or Aileen, and older brothers Robert and Gerald. Like most other vintage cases, this one reeks and seeps with a deep, intense sense of history and mystery, overwhelming tragedy. He stood close to 4 feet and weighed 50 pounds. A Caucasian little boy with a scar on his right temple. And his two oldest brothers, William, 23, and John Joseph, 20, were away overseas fighting in Belgium as Allied soldiers to deter Hitler's forces. And yes, guys, this was a time of war. And so Richard's father, John, was in a military base stationed just out of town. And so Aileen, or Eileen, it's spelled with an A, Eileen, his older sister, was 18 years old at the time. Nicknamed Pee-wee, Richard was a small boy for his age, and he was also extremely timid and quiet and shy. He was, at that time, in grade 3, and according to Gertrude, getting along very nicely, she told journalists several years after he vanished, back in 47. And in fact, little Richard adored school. Yeah, and he was always first to leave for school every morning. Imagine a little 9-year-old boy never wanting to be late for school. That's cute. Richard was a very quiet boy, and it would never have been known to enter a dark room on his own or converse with strangers. Now, Beda Street is super long, and although we have no way of knowing how densely populated it was in 1944, today it ends with a service station and several auto body shops right at the end. In a little blue hat that he always wore, perched peak up on the back of his head, Richard was clearly visible in front of the house, riding his older sister's bicycle. Brother Gerald was inside, keeping an eye on him. Suddenly, Richard was gone, vanished from outside his house on Beda Street, Etobicoke, while playing on his bike. He was 9 years old. The bicycle was left in the yard, but Richard was gone. Something likely happened immediately after Richard rode back home and descended from it, or, much riskier, the assailant returned it there after abducting him.
March along, sing a song with the army of the free. Count the brave, count the true, who have fought to victory. We're the army and proud of our name. We're the army and proudly proclaim. First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might, and the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won, and the army goes rolling along. And it's high, high, hey, the army's on its way. Count off and Kate is loud and strong. For wherever we go, you will always know that the army goes rolling along.
In other words, something happened to Richard that day. Let me explain. So, that night, most of the family was away at the movies. However, Richard had just been to the movies the evening before, and so he decided to stay home with his older brother that night. And but only one brother is actually mentioned in this story, Gerald, and the other brother was probably at the movies with the rest of the family. So that was Gertrude, Aileen, and the other brother who were at the movies without Gerald and Richard. It so happens that Richard decided to step out in the front of his home and go for a ride on his bike. And so that evening, He wore a striped jersey, blue pants, gray socks with a yellow band, and a dark blue nylon windbreaker, and a ring that was marked with the initials KL. And I don't know exactly who or what KL stood for. Needless to say, of course, there was a search. And the search ended up being that the police scoured the neighborhood, and an Army military team was called in to help with the search. John, Richard's father, did come home from the military base to help in the search for his son Richard. And they drained ponds. They checked every nook and cranny. They dredged creeks, and they checked down the well and outhouses. And they looked for days and days and days, and nothing ever turned up. There was never any evidence found. So resources were indeed exhausted, and the absence of any evidence whatsoever deeply scarred the boy's mother, Gertrude. And psychics even offered to tell the family where Richard was for a very high price. Unfortunately, that price was much too steep for them. Reported sightings came from Western Canada and from Florida. What the details were, I don't know. If a body was indeed found, John and Gertrude would go down to the morgue to see if it was their son. However, it was never Richard. Which makes me wonder just how many little boys went missing that year. I can't get an exact count. Gertrude wrote letters to police forces all across Ontario, and she was pleading for them to look for Richard. She wrote to the FBI, newspapers, mailed 100 photos of little Richard, blonde, shy smile, bright blue eyes, but nothing ever materialized from her pleas. 10 years after Richard vanished, Gertrude, who had medical issues, passed away with a broken heart. She was a broken-hearted mother. She was 56 years old, and John, Richard's dad, passed away in 1973 at 80. And that's so sad. 3 of Richard's brothers have also passed away. And so there's no way to go back over the case and the details because all of those people are gone. And so it haunted this family because the family members died, passed away, not knowing what happened to their brother. It tormented them. And so it's something that was on their mind every day. Eileen and Robert, 3 years older than Richard, are all that's left of his immediate family. And I do believe that it's been about 11 years since this article was written. I believe that Eileen has also passed away by this time because she was 88 11 years ago. So I'm not saying she's not around. I'm just saying it's more than likely that she's passed away. So guys, Richard he was a human being. He could still be a human being. And as a society, it's not good for us to just simply cast him aside and forget about him because we cannot resolve the answers to the mystery of his disappearance. And so to honor him and his family, we must and should tell his story and show his picture. That is pretty important. And so you never know when or how something might be triggered, going back in time to jog one's memory, and it could be even just the tiniest shred of information that could finally answer the question of what happened to Richard on that evening in July 1944. So Aileen turned 88 years ago, and she celebrated her brother Richard's birthday every February the 9th. And he was born in 1935. So that means that she celebrated it 70 times. 70 times without losing faith. And every year since he disappeared, she would talk about it. And she talked about it more after turning 88, because she was worried that when the last of Richard's siblings would disappear, namely her, Richard would have been entirely forgotten. And so that hasn't completely happened yet. But it's very hard to keep a case alive when nobody remembers anything about it. I don't know. I don't know how they could have ever investigated this disappearance. It seems to be a complete brick wall. Nothing there. Over the coming years, the Marlowes bought presents for Richard each Christmas, wrapped them and put them under the tree. In 1947, 3 years after he vanished, it was a sleigh, a crokinole board, and clothes. Every Christmas, Gertrude lit a candle and put it in the window. The superstition is that when a candle burns down, the missing person will return. But although other candles have burned out, Gertrude continued to light new candles every Christmas. For the first 3 years, Gertrude dreamed about Richard. He appeared clear as day and asked, "Were you worrying about me, Mommy?" But soon the dreams stopped coming. So, with the lack of evidence, certain theories, well, one at least, began to circulate. And that was that it was alleged that someone abducted Richard. And so he wouldn't have been the type to just run off and wander away and have an adventure all on his own. He was not of that personality. He was much too timid, and he was very good at sensing danger. And so he came from a very good home and really had no reason to run away. And so he was very happy at home and at school. So the runaway theory just doesn't work here. So around a dozen years ago, when they began to go over this case again, caseworkers focused on the senior citizens of this society, of this community, in order to see if they would be able to remember anything. Because if they focused, say for instance, on the younger generation, nobody would have come forth with any information whatsoever because nobody was born. So they had to really focus on the right specific age group and community, and who knows, maybe some of them are still living, who might have remembered anything, but nothing ever came from that, that any new developments never came from any of that. So it's pretty sad. And also, it's hard to believe that nobody at all knows what happened. How can that be? So, I told you I normally don't give my own ideas here, but I mean, geez, this is an old 80-year-old case, and I would imagine that some fresh ideas are what people need in order to perhaps jog a memory or check a detail. So it's already been described that this specific time period was one of war and military strife all across the world, not just in Europe. And so Canada, Richard's home country, would also fight alongside other countries against racial prejudice, and just as it should be also doing right now. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I'm not trying to create a theory here, I'm just going to spit it out, because people, basically police stations and politicians, government, don't want to accept the fact that when there's a war going on in some part of the world, whether it be Asia or Europe, let's face it, persecution becomes all the hype. And if some people are lucky enough not to be feeling that pinch right now, well then good. That's good. But usually there are some members of society who become quite targeted. And I would imagine a child would probably, depending on the circumstances, become one of those people. You know what I'm saying? Very vulnerable. And immigrants are other types of targeted persons that can suffer a great deal during times of war, whether they're safely rescued or struggling to get away. I don't know. And so, anyway, persecution typically has a small range of meanings, and it is basically to harass or punish in a manner that is specifically designed to injure, grieve, or afflict pain. And so, guys, you have to take this as a fact of life, whether you want to or not. this exists in every country of the world, and it's not fair to say that because you are protected under certain eyes of the law or whatever, that nothing has ever happened to you or nothing will ever happen to you. And so it's also very corrupt. It's a very corrupt and unfair practice. And it usually occurs over a very long period of time. And it usually occurs specifically because of race, religion, or political beliefs. Now, I would say Christians are most targeted. And when I see that police stations are setting out in hordes to occupy Christian churches, it is not, to me, simply a matter of being in the guise to maybe protect, but I would call that probably persecution. Now, I'm not saying that that's persecution, but that's an example of what persecution is. And yeah, institutions do this. Hate groups do this. And, it's simply a matter of fact during times of war, persecution becomes a systematic mistreatment of an individual or group by another individual or group, whoever or wherever they may be. This can be done remotely across the world. And I know that Canada is one of the most surveilled and watched country all across the world. So it's hard for us. And anyway, I thought I would get that out there because it really is something that people seem to not want to take part in terms of awareness. And it's hard for me to believe that people won't acknowledge that this kind of abuse exists on a daily basis. It really does. Situations that cause suffering, harassment, imprisonment, internment, fear, or pain are all factors that very well may establish legal persecution. Now, when I say legal, I mean in legal terms, not that it's legal, it's illegal. But people still resort to this during times of war. And I know that my mistreatment in public has really soared as soon as the war began again. So those groups who are most often always at risk are Christians. And because of the historical timing of this particular crime, I am merely trying to give this case some very new and fresh perspective, although persecution is by no means a new concept. Seriously, cars were massive back then in 1944, and if there was any reason for Richard to have vanished, being struck by a vehicle probably would have been it, and provided the responsible party with a motive to do away with the remains and hide them permanently. Either deliberate or accidental, a secret car fatality seems a very plausible theory to me. What else might have happened to the boy? Then, There is also the matter of Richard's whereabouts the evening before while he was at the movies. I mean, the whereabouts um, uh, concerning, his companions. And in a way, this case may recall some details of the Robbie Brown disappearance in the 1970s. So, who were the companions of Richard, of the 9-year-old boy, on the previous night? And who were the friends of Aileen, Robert, and Gerald? Robert is the other brother. Who were they? What might have happened to Richard? Well, for example, on May the 18th, 1995, the remains of a woman were found under a cement floor at the former site of Robertson Motors on 1515 Danforth Avenue in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The floor had been poured in 1949, which means, obviously, that the girl died in 1949. She is referred to as Jane Doe. She was a white female between 19 and 40 years old. She was 165 centimeters to 170 centimeters tall, 5'5" to 5'7", and she had brown red hair. Yes, people were evil even in the 40s. Anyway, Richard's case remains unsolved to this day, but there is no question that he did indeed meet with some sort of foul play. Unlike our last case review, there are no allegations that police files are sealing off any particular information from the public. And so the police don't seem to have information that we don't. So it's improbable that any information whatsoever is indeed being kept secret. I can't vouch for that, but it doesn't seem like that here. So I hope that you have enjoyed listening and watching and learning about the case of Richard Marlowe and his disappearance. And I hope that you please subscribe to stay updated for more of these sorts of case reviews and other content as well. Hi guys, before I pop away, I want you to have a look at the faces at the end of the vlog and see if you can recognize anybody. It would be a great help. Bye!